The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com.
Welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast, the only Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. I'm your host, Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce, and you have joined us for a discussion with one of my favorite Masonic authors, Brother Austin Shifrin. But before we get talking about No Ordinary Fire, quick heads up, want to give love and appreciation thanks to our Patreon subscribers. Yes, thank you for joining us with that 7-day free trial, or decided to take the plunge and saying, hey, $5 a month, ad-free episodes, access to all the subscriber extras, sign me up. You can get started by checking out the description for this episode right there, show notes, link, find Craftsman Online on Patreon. So I got a couple thoughts before we get started with Brother Austin Shifrin here. This episode is all about finding Masonic light in very unexpected places. Austin has a really interesting formula, and stop me if you've heard this. He typically takes programs or presentations that he does for lodges, and he's rolled them into books. This is his third book, No Common Fire. Ultimately, our conversation is going to get really into testing your system of beliefs, especially when it comes to other cultures and traditions and how they explain creationism. He's a two-time defending champ as we welcome back one of my favorite guests, Brother Austin Shifrin. Welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast.
Michael, thank you so much for having me. I have to say, on the heels of you talking about how nice it is to have a return guest, at the risk of this turning into a mutual admiration society, how nice it is to come on a program where the host does as much preparation as you do. So kudos to you, sir.
If I'm going to have a book author on, then I had to be prepared to do this thing called read, and I love doing it. You gave me a couple of chapter selections to get into, and we're going to jump into his new book, No Common Fire, which you can find on Amazon or through his website, which is austinshifrin.com. And if you're wondering how to spell Shifrin, because I put a C in there, and that's not the way to do it. It's Austin, SHIFRIN.com. And that's how you'll find his book, No Common Fire. It's not really a chapter book, right? Because every chapter has a different topic or theme, which is awesome as a Freemason. And when you're like, hey, Arce, pick your card here. Which one do you want to go with? And I'm like, oh, dude, was King Solomon, the Masons that built that, did they really cut the stones for the temple? Was there really a mythical bird or like a piece of wood from paradise that has all the answers? And you know, we were talking about questions we should have asked each other before I hit the record button. Kebra Nagast, am I saying that right?
You are correct, sir.
Excellent. Oh, I don't sound like a total idiot. But before we get into your research on the Kebra Nagast, your chapter kind of starts with the story of what inspired you to write this part of the book.
It started with a work conversation. I work at a financial institution doing a bunch of database stuff. We've all got our day jobs. I overheard a conversation between two fellas talking about a failing financial institution and the possibility of other entities sort of carving it up for what remains, right? They were throwing out the metaphor of like two lions fighting over what's left of a gazelle or something like that. Then somebody was trying to come up with a metaphor for yet another party swooping in. So they said something about something giant coming in and carrying off the lions, right? So they were just working like a couple levels of metaphor there. And you know how it is when you play one of these word association games or something. I was trying to think back because I felt like I remembered some old tall tale about a bird so large that it could carry off lions. I was thinking of a mythical bird called the roc, not R-O-C-K, but R-O-C. Thanks to the magic of the internet, when I went and Googled it, I started going down a rabbit hole with all sorts of other associations with the roc, because it did not originate with kids' stories like Sinbad the Sailor. There were references to it much farther back in a translation of this book called the Kebra Nagast. And I was like, what on earth is this thing that I have never heard of? If I'm remembering correctly, the translation of this title is The Glory of Kings, and it is a piece of scripture composed in Ethiopia in the 14th century uh, which has a lot of ties to the narratives of the Old Testament. Almost from a literary perspective, it helps to explain or justify the lineage of kingship of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church from for several generations. And so I was so curious and mystified by this that I ended up disappearing down this internet rabbit hole, and having emerged out the other side somewhere in Wonderland, I was like, this is something I think I should share with my audience. But why? The only reason that I thought to bring it back to a Masonic audience is because it contained references to King Solomon, of whom we are so fond and familiar in our Freemasonry.
Okay, we're going to pick all of this apart, get a little bit deeper into it. Now I've got a whole slew of new questions. I think the first one is, when I first was kind of exposed to the Ethiopian culture, was living here just outside of the nation's capital. There's a very large Ethiopian population in Silver Spring, Maryland. I mistook their alphabet and their language, their written language, as Armenian, which my wife is Armenian, which led to us actually going into one of the stores and then discovering, okay, quickly, these are not Armenians. They're much taller than my wife's people. But their history was so fascinating. Their ancient history, literally just being across the sea, the ocean, from where everything was happening in the Fertile Belt, the place of all creation in the Middle East. What kind of caught your ear or eye when it came to their story?
The segue from the familiar into the unfamiliar, right? We talk about Solomon all the time. It is also true that in some of our Masonic work, and I'm thinking particularly in the York Rite, there is even mention of the visit of the Queen of Ethiopia, Makeda, who we refer to as the Queen of Sheba, arriving at Solomon's court because she heard rumors of his greatness, and she wanted to confirm or dispute those for herself, with the witness of her own eyes. And she was so taken with the splendor of Solomon and his court and how he governed his country that she even renounced the former spiritual or religious practices of her people, who worshipped the sun, and came to worship, quote unquote, the one true God. From there, the story heads in a direction less familiar to those of us who were brought up on the Old Testament. Not only does Solomon lie with the Queen of Sheba, he gives her a ring so that when his offspring will be born, he may return to Solomon with something by which the king will be able to recognize his child. In the version according to the Kebra Nagast, Makeda returns to Ethiopia. She gives birth to Menelik. I could be mispronouncing that, but that's how it's spelled. Who returns to Solomon. Solomon hopes that Menelik will stay with him, but Menelik, after his visit, says that he must return to his mother. Solomon offers to send back with Menelik the firstborn sons of various different nobles of his house. As I read farther and farther along in this, I was like, well, this isn't the story that I know.
Mm-hmm.
But let's face it, Michael, you weren't there, and neither was I.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I know that the version of the tale told by this other culture in this other part of the world doesn't have the kernel of truth? And perhaps there are things that I don't know. So this is what intrigued me so much.
Oh, I always find that fascinating. These ancient civilizations, like down in Mexico and the Yucatan, and seeing their versions of pyramids, and then thinking of like what we all are familiar with in Egypt. And here's people that were separated by oceans and land masses. They never would have ever come in contact with each other, but we're all aligning and following the stars and doing similar things. And, to your point, just it's humanity, man. We were figuring out a way to survive and advance. And the other thing that I found fascinating about Ethiopia, and that's what kind of drew me to this chapter and really into the grist of what you were talking about in your book, is the idea the only ever time I've heard Ethiopia referenced in Freemasonry as a possible place of where the Book of Enoch was supposedly created, or they mentioned things about that, and it was like the land on the other side of the water, and it was like, ooh, fascinating. So it was so neat to get into something where a brother like you did that thing that I love, which is the guy that goes into the rabbit hole survives and then comes back and tells us the story instead of like, well, come over here, I'll tell you a little bit about it. You got to go read this book or watch this YouTube video.
I consider it such a privilege. The opportunity that I've had the past, good grief, decade or so to write for people, to share something with people. When I see something resonate with an audience, when I see brethren get fired up and come running to me with follow-up questions or to tell me about some reference that they caught and something else that they've thought of. I consider myself, like an itinerant peddler who has all sorts of, fascinating little trinkets hidden under his cloak. And I go share it with somebody and I'm like, look at this fascinating little treasure. And when it sparks something in other brothers, I'm always tickled.
Brother Austin Shifrin is our guest on this episode of the Craftsman Online podcast. His book is No Ordinary Fire. You can find it on Amazon. Just search for it by the title. You can also pick it up through his website, which is austinshifrin.com. Again, there's no C in Shifrin. It's just Shifrin. You can also find him on Facebook and Instagram the same way. I follow him on Instagram because I got kicked off Facebook years ago. I want to stick with the Keber Negrast chapter in the book, No Ordinary Fire. You have a bunch of cool little stories that are in here. And as you said, we don't want to give the whole thing away, but touch on certain parts, especially as it relates to King Solomon's Freemasons and now today's brothers that come from it. And one of the parts of the legend that was really kind of cool of the rock is the idea of hewing stones and how a solution to do all of this came from a miraculous wood from paradise. And the wood that we're talking about, I'm guessing, are not the tall cedars from Lebanon that some Masons might be familiar with.
I think this will also give me an opportunity to come back to exactly what I was saying to you about this comparative religion, comparative theology, and can I be open-minded enough to listen to somebody else's scripture, somebody else's gospel, and say, why is this any more strange than anything I believe myself? The story goes that the Masons had been mandated and instructed to hew their large stones, but could not fathom how they were going to do it. Is this plausible? I mean, do we imagine that the Masons already had experience and had figured out their methods and were capable? Perhaps we do, but this is how the tale goes. And so they pleaded and entreated with Solomon to assist them in this task that had been set before them that they could not figure out how to accomplish. And Solomon, tapping into the wisdom of God, told them to go up into the mountains and find either the egg or an already hatched, already born baby roc, this giant mythical bird. So they went into the mountains, they found a baby roc, they brought it back to Solomon, and he further instructed them to place it under a giant brass cauldron or basin. And they followed his instructions because they knew of the wisdom of Solomon. Well, the baby roc, and it was clearly not, in fact, a small bird like we think of a baby bird, because if the mythical roc adult is giant, then the baby is giant. The baby is under the brass cauldron and is crying out for its mother. The mother, of course, comes flying down from the mountain to answer the call of her baby, sees that the baby is trapped under the cauldron, and in her panic to find a solution herself, flies to paradise and retrieves some enormous piece of wood, flies back to the court of Solomon, and drops this mysterious and mystical wood from paradise on the brass cauldron, which splits the brass cauldron open, allowing the baby to escape. But in the meantime, having found this miraculous piece of wood and knowing that it is somehow strong enough to split a brass cauldron, the Masons are then instructed to use this mysterious wood to hew the stones. And not even by striking it forcibly, but when they determine the line along which they want the stones to split, if they lay this mystical piece of wood against the stone, it just cracks in twain. Kind of a wild story. And I read this, and then I step back and I close my book and I go, how am I to feel about this story? Am I to take it as literal? Is it metaphorical? And then I stopped and I thought about our friend, the Shamir. Now, the Shamir is another mythical creature that originates in Jewish lore that supposedly Solomon kept somewhere in secret, and this mysterious small creature allowed him to split the stones. And I stopped and I thought to myself, well, look, if I can buy the shamir, how large a next hop, skip, and a jump is it to believe the mystical piece of wood from paradise?
Another piece of the Bible ends up in your writing here. We're going to be talking about the Ark of the Covenant here. You claim it was smuggled out of Israel by the sons of the elders, a plan that was given to Azarias by an angel. And the Keber Nagas says, well, hey, this could not have succeeded. In fact, if it wasn't something that God wanted to do, it, quote, if it hadn't been the will of God. So here we get into the whole concept of divine will. And as a Freemason, like, you have this very important piece of representing God on earth being stolen, but it was all part of God's plan.
I love the giant question mark that you slap at the end of that statement. These things could be unsettling. They could be disturbing. You get into questions of free will versus determinism. There's a lot to ponder here. I will say it certainly wouldn't be the first example of something so unsettling happening. Because if I hearken back to the Old Testament, there's, we could even go into the story of Moses and the Pharaoh. And when Moses was attempting to facilitate the extraction of the Jewish people from from Egypt, right? Shall we say? God told him, not only instructed him to go to the Pharaoh and tell him what the risks were, what the punishment would be if Pharaoh failed to release the Jews, but he also told Moses he's going to say no to you. In the scripture, it says that God hardened the Pharaoh's heart so he would say no. Why be a puppet master behind two opposing forces only to create such drama? But the purpose of the story was so that there would be plagues, so that there would be a liberation story. So if the great architect of the universe sets things in motion, it could certainly be argued that they might be beyond our understanding. So if God decrees that now it is time for the Ark of the Covenant to leave the possession of Solomon and his lineage, then perhaps there is a reason behind this that we are not capable of fathoming. That doesn't necessarily have to comfort us. In fact, it surely doesn't.
It's interesting because I've also heard the expression that, it's, the divine will, the supreme architect of the universe, the grand architect, the great architect, whatever version of it you want to use, that it's already been decided, right? And that doesn't mean that we have to act like a leaf in a stream. It also kind of gives us some freedom of understanding, like, hey, everything that's happened in my life, good and bad, and most of the time we tend to focus on the bad stuff, like, all of this has been predetermined to shape the experiences that become me. This is how I live my life. So I guess it also kind of provides some of that, but man, the examples that he always used that are always in the Bible, man, those are some very extreme examples, man.
Yeah, it can be unsettling.
And what I loved about this chapter, it kind of selfishly for me, is I remember hearing about King Solomon as a kid, going to Bible school and the temple, and then that all kind of being reinforced later as an adult as Freemasons. But to be honest, King David, I was always more interested in his stories because he seemed to be kind of a greater king at times than like his dad, and the pressure that he had to be better than his dad, who was kind of really talked about as being one of the more, I guess, perfect Ashlar type of kings, if we were to compare him to that in the Bible, to where in that same conversation with Makeda and the worker, Solomon tells her that the wisdom that he has is a gift from God, and that he's just a vassal or a vessel and a slave to God. And I've often thought about brothers, and as you mentioned in like a leadership point, when they become the worshipful master of the lodge, they ascend to it, they're elected, they're installed. And a very wise one once said, I'm merely a steward of this chair for the time being in which I will serve. I'll never forget that, because he knows that when his term is done, he's going to hand over that gavel of authority to the next brother and hope that he has, got it to a place that he can move it forward. Were you impressed, I guess maybe is the word to use, with the idea that we have this humble human King Solomon instead of this King Solomon the Great, the Wise figure that we kind of know him as?
In the course of time, I've gotten a pretty broad and nuanced picture in my mind of Solomon and his aspects and his accomplishments. The Valley of Pittsburgh does a wonderful rendition of the degree in Northern Masonic jurisdiction called Intendant of the Building. And it's about the succession passing from David to Solomon. But the version that we typically do our version in the Valley with the script that is shared by the entire Northern Masonic jurisdiction and in the costumes and setting appropriate to that period in history, or as accurate as we're capable of making. But Valley of Pittsburgh got permission once to do a modernized version. Fascinating thing, where David, instead of being the king of a kingdom, was the CEO of this major multinational corporation, and but he's nearing retirement, and all of his children are squabbling over who is going to be the successor. And when you see it in suits and ties with Starbucks cups and video conferencing, something comes home in a way that might be harder to relate to when it's robes and turbans and sandals, even though I believe we kept the dialogue word for word. And the thing about Solomon is this notion that when he found out that he was going to be the successor to the throne, and he went to pray, he didn't pray for power, and he didn't pray for wealth, and he didn't pray for success. He prayed for wisdom so that he could be a good custodian of that leadership position, a good steward. And for that discernment, he was rewarded with the other things as well. If there could be any better example to set for our leaders who are just beginning on their year in 2026, I can't imagine what it might be.
We're talking with brother Austin Shifrin. His book is available on Amazon. No Common Fire is the title. You can search for it right there. He's on Facebook, Instagram, and another place to find him is on his website, austinshifrin.com. One of the stories in this chapter has nothing to do with the Kebra-Nagast. It's a specific point that you make to E.A. Wallace Budge.
Oh, Budge.
As a Pennsylvania brother, he's got to find a way to sneak brother Benjamin Franklin into his book or his writings. Of course, brother Franklin was founded the American Philosophical Society. But the point that you get into is about esotericism. And we've talked a little bit about this, as I mentioned before we started rolling, is like, I don't set out every season on the Craftsman Online podcast like, this season we're going to talk about George Washington, or we're going to talk about the esoterics. But we've been getting a lot into education, and I've stated this a few times, of just the natural curiosity or truth seeking that I believe every Freemason has. And that's also kind of a quality or a skill or a trait that would make you a good Freemason. So this idea of, as you mentioned, like curious men of Franklin's time, are you seeing a resurgence of this now with the esoteric research that you're doing on other brothers that you know of that are in your circle?
I think it's a little hard to say. I know that the concept or topic, or maybe even just the word esotericism is awfully divisive within the fraternity nowadays.
Mm.
And when asked to comment on this, my current train of thought is that there are really basically three different schools of thought about esotericism. One is to conclude that things like astrology, tarot, alchemy are secretly woven into the fabric of Masonic ritual or precepts, and should be sought out by all people who are serious students of Freemasonry. That's way off one end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Way off at another end of the spectrum are folks who believe, hey, look, if you're talking about English and Scottish fellas from the from somewhere between the first and the 14th century who were building things out of stone, it's highly likely that they were Christian persons and not particularly interested in astrology or tarot or Kabbalah. And so, in fact, in these gentlemen's opinion, nothing reeking of the esoteric belongs commingled with my Freemasonry. That's at this end of the spectrum.
Mm.
And I think that there's probably more than one position that falls in some kind of middle ground. But the one that keeps crossing my mind is that, by definition, esotericism means something that is kept hidden and secret on purpose, and then is only taught to a select few. By that definition, Freemasonry is by itself esoteric. Whether you think any of that other subject matter should be connected with it or not. Freemasonry is a thing that is kept hidden and secret on purpose and should only be taught to a select few. So there's plenty of opinions on that. Now, when I think about fellas like Franklin, I do like to think that it's possible we have a little something in common, aside from my waistline and my hairline. The funny thing about Franklin is, if you stop and think about it, before he ever got to be this natural philosopher and capturing lightning with a key, or becoming in charge of this institution and that, and helping build the city of Philadelphia and yada yada yada, what he was a guy with a day job printing, who also wanted to do stuff on the side that he was curious about and better himself. Thankfully, I've found plenty of guys like that, many of whom are Masons. But when they wrap up for the day, instead of just wanting to go sit on the couch and stare off into space, they feel like it's time to roll up their sleeves and different work begins.
If you don't mind, I'd like to kind of entertain you with like my kind of thought on esoterics and esotericism and esoterics, for lack of a better term.
By all means.
It's kind of to what you're saying, was like, I do think there's those brothers that are just naturally curious. They have a really high intellectual level. It doesn't mean they were the best student in school. They're just always into books and always asking questions and seek, like just, and they're the kind that you'll ask them something and then they'll start answering and you're like, I feel 1,000 times smarter and I need to take a nap because my brain is tired from everything you just said. Like, that was amazing, right? Like, and I think those guys are naturally drawn to Freemasonry because for whatever reason, they maybe knew a lot more about it or hints about it before they got into it, kind of the flavors or the seasoning of if Freemasonry was a dish. And then they're the ones that can hear our ritual and then see through it to like other things and connect it to all these theories and philosophies. And you're like, love these guys. They're awesome. That's one type of esoteric. And I think that's the one that genuinely comes to mind when you use the word esoteric or esotericism or esoterica. It's like, oh, the smart guys. Oh, they're so annoying because they're so smart and good looking, of course. But then I think there's the part of esoterics. And I had this conversation with a group of brothers from the Valley of New York City recently. And I got a chance to attend one of their outings. And, I think at the time of when this podcast is going to air, I am still considering myself a bad Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction Mason because I demitted during the pandemic, but I'm planning on coming back, at a certain point. And I told them, one of the things that I look at a definition for esoteric is that you find what is special in something that other people walk right by and they don't see any value at all. And that's what makes it special. And in Freemasonry, what even makes that more special is that you also make connections with other brothers who see the same thing. Well, it could not be all other brothers, but we're still bound together and we're still like-minded. It's just that some of these guys will be like, oh, hey, do you want to do a afternoon Saturday tour of, St. John's Cathedral in New York City? Nope, got better things to do. Hey, that's cool. And other stuff will be like, where do we sign up? It doesn't matter how much this is going to cost. Like, dude, I am all in.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned this because there is a word that I have learned to embrace and not shy away from. And this is not new, and it's not as a result of just my involvement in Freemasonry. But, like, I'm a nerd.
I have that same t-shirt.
I'm not trying to fool anyone. I'm certainly not trying to fool myself. I have had these glasses since I was 7.
Mm.
And, it's funny because I remember when I originally moved to Pittsburgh, it was to go to Carnegie Mellon University. And when I found myself in this sea of nerds, I was like, my people. Here's the thing, is you travel in Freemasonry, and it is, in fact, exciting that Freemasonry contains types of diversity that I'm not just talking about ethnic diversity, which is the kind of diversity that we've so strongly attached to that word nowadays, but diversity of interests, diversity of backgrounds, diversity of careers. And the thing is, it also means that sometimes I will encounter guys who were not on the same wavelength. And that's fine. In fact, it's kind of good. It enriches the experience. I am not going to lie to you. I have done presentations in lodges and Masonic bodies where I realized I had put someone to sleep. And, I have to grow comfortable with that. But when I find my fellow Masonic nerds, I am giddy. And they are too. And so I will continue traveling and continue communicating to find my fellow Masonic nerds. If they happen to be listening right now, please reach out. I'd be happy to chat with you.
Yeah, and I'll help these guys that are like, an invitation to make a new friend. Where do I find them? AustinShifrin.com. And again, it's SHIFRIN. AustinShifrin.com is the website. I'll get you out of here on this one, brother, because I want to be respectful of your time tonight. As we mentioned, he is a 2-time defending champion here on the Craftsman Online podcast, but this is actually his 3rd Masonic book, and we've been talking about No Common Fire with brother Austin Shifrin. And as we mentioned, you cover a ton of different topics and subjects. I mean, this is like the Crayola crayon full set of all the colors in the spectrum. Was there a chapter, and you could give a little bit of a tease of it, that would have been one of your favorites, if not your favorite chapter to write?
Yeah, I don't want to give short shrift to any of the other chapters, but I can say that one of my favorites is the 3 Masonic bonds. I wrote explicitly for an ingathering of the Allied Masonic degrees, which, to oversimplify, is sort of an offshoot. It's one of our optional bodies, an invitational, after, when one has gone through the Royal Arch in York Rite. And the Chapter 3 Masonic bonds, also to kind of streamline in a nutshell, is about 3 symbols from 3 separate Masonic bodies, which have both a physical aspect, but also like, a metaphorical or symbolic explanation. And they talk about, the ties that bind, so to speak. What are the obligations of the man to his lodge, the fraternity? Flipping this on its head, something that we don't talk about nearly often enough. What are the obligations of the fraternity to the man? What is he owed in return? And then, what are our obligations, all of us, to each other? That and how these 3 connections, these 3 ties, interplay with each other. That might be my favorite darn chapter that I wrote. It opens with a poem, which I also wrote. When Jericho fell to the trumpet and the sword, Rahab hung upon her sill a simple scarlet cord, a symbol in the onslaught of the promises we keep and the powers that protect us when we wake and when we sleep. The Israelites were promised that they would possess the land. The Amorites already feared Almighty God's right hand. But anyone at any time can come into the light, abandon their iniquity, and join the cause of right. The next time you're confronted with a challenge or a choice, take the time to listen to that still small voice. There's still time for teshuvah, returning to the Lord. remember humble Rahab and her simple scarlet cord.
Thanks again to Brother Austin Shifrin, our guest this week on the podcast. You will hear more from him if you are a Craftsman Online Patreon subscriber. Yeah, dude, we got a subscriber extra episode. We're not done talking with Austin. Be on the lookout for that on Thursday. Ooh, interested in joining us as a Patreon subscriber? It's just $5. I know you can do it. Start your free 7-day trial by opening up the description for this episode, and right there in the show notes, bam, there's the link to join us on Patreon. Looking ahead to our next time together, we'll be welcoming back Brother Brian Maddox, another Pennsylvania Freemason. His podcast, A Mason's Work, has recently joined the Craftsman Online team, and we'll be talking about these really cool Masonic reflection decks as a tool to bring Freemasonry and our principles into everyday life. Looking forward to that next Monday. Until then, let peace and harmony prevail.